So last time we did dynamic connectivity, and the main ingredient which we had was this sketching for L0 sampling. So we'll try to finish that proof for that this particular lemma, and then we'll go on to do our today's lecture. Okay, so what this lemma tells us that there exists a random matrix A whose dimension is like some log square n times n, such that for any x in R to the power n, with probability at least 1 minus 1 by poly n, we can learn ixi for some xi not equal to 0 from ax. So basically what it tells us, I think either I should have this capital N or this capital N. So basically I have a small matrix from which like suppose I have this sketch y which is ax. Okay, now with the help of this y which is a times x, so which is a basically log square n dimension vector, I can figure out is there a coordinate in my x which is non-zero, and in fact I can figure out that coordinate and what is its value stored there, like with very high probability. So this is what one of the most important lemma which is useful in graph algorithms is this. Okay, so this is what we'll try to sketch a proof for this, or a proof basically. So we saw how we can use this for connectivity sketch. So last time we tried to motivate this is that we wanted to check if the input vector is one sparse or not, and if so, find the corresponding indices, right? Basically, right? So then we saw that then we had this that with promise that there's a single non-zero entry xi, and we wanted to find, given this promise that there's a single non-zero xi, and then how to find this. Then we saw that, well, then if I know that all the entries are coming from 1 to n, and at the end I'm only going to miss one number, then I basically keep the sum of what I have seen, and I know what is the sum of the total numbers. So if I subtract w minus what is the sum I have stored, then I will get the missing number. So this is how so this was the first idea. And then we ask ourselves, well, how do we recover, or so that was okay for the number, but I also wanted to get a coordinate in this promise version. Then we saw that we need to keep two numbers, a and b, where b is basically the sum of what I have seen, but a is basically, I not only stored the sum, but I stored what is the coordinate of that sum, right, into the value, right? So this is what a was stored, and at the end I was returning a over b and x a over b equal to b. So a over b tells me the coordinate, and x a over b tells me the value. Okay, and so even in that promise, and so basically what we were storing is that if look at a, I'm storing I times xi, and b I'm storing the value of xi, and if there is single non-zero xj, then b is precisely equal to xj and a equal to j times xj, so j is nothing but a over b. Okay, so this is what we saw last time. Okay, but this was under the promise that there is exactly one non-zero coordinate in my vector. Now but this algorithm cannot detect if there is a single j. I mean maybe it will return you some a comma b, it will return you some value b, but can we be sure that it is not that, like b stores the sum of two numbers? Okay, and somehow what happened is that a, the coordinates, the a plus j aj, the coordinates for which this sum has happened, it is still okay for us, right? In the sense that if I do a over b, what I'm getting is one of the coordinates from 1 to n, but I could not be sure that the value which I have stored here is actually correspond to the value which is stored at this coordinate. Okay, and to do that, we use this idea of prime numbers. which, and if you take random power of that, then the idea is that it really what do you call distinguishes a particular coordinate with very high probability. And how did we do that? Well, so this was our algorithm. We chose a prime p which was large enough, like some n to the power c, 2 into n to the power c. We chose a random number from this prime uniformly at random. Now we are keeping 3 numbers, a, b, and c. And what we did, while stream is not empty and given a value j comma aj, so we definitely stored j times aj, a plus j times aj as before to get the coordinate. B stores the value. But what are we storing at C? We are storing not aj, but r to the power j times aj. So it is like some random power of the coordinate, okay? Some random number to the power of the coordinate and modulo mod b. Now, what are we saying? If a comma b does not belong to a natural, belong to 1 to n, then definitely I know that what I have stored is not equal to, like I have more than one coordinate. Or if C is not equal to, so what is C? So forget about this mod P arithmetic. Then if there is exactly one number, then what is C storing? C is going to store some B times, okay? Some, what is C is going to store? B times, because that's a single number, okay? This is what tells us. And R times whatever may be the coordinate of B is, right? Which is A over B. So I check whether I pass these 2 tests or not. If I fail both the tests, then forget it. But if I pass these tests, then I return A comma B and X A comma B equal to B. Now the question is that yes, this can fail, but what is the probability that this will fail? Why will this fail? And then we said, well, look at A. What is A storing? I in 1 to n, I xi, which is same as I xi not equal to 0, I xi. And similarly, B stores the summation of those numbers which are not equal to 0, like the coordinates. Now, if I look at C, this is precisely what it also stores, but it stores r to the power I times xi into mod p, but forget mod p for now. It will come in a minute, okay? And if there is a single index I so that xi is not equal to 0, then definitely B is equal to xi, A equal to I xi, and C equal to rab xab mod p, and we will find the correct answer. The problem is if there are more than 2 coordinates, then I would like to say then, well, then you will not pass these 2 tests, right? This is what we would like to say. Okay, so assume that X is not sparse and A by B belongs to, like A by B, if I look at A by B, okay, it does pass the test, okay? And secondly, so this is what I tell, that algorithm will pass the test if A by B belongs to 1 to n, and C is actually equal to whatever I stored B, RAB mod P. So I had 2 tests. Now I would like to ask, what is the probability that if there are 2 coordinates which are non-zero, then I pass this test? So let's ask ourselves, why do I pass this test? Well, so to do this, I will prove this following lemma, which is like I in n, xi is not equal to 0 with the position of non-zero entry. So these are the positions where the entries are non-zero. And if mod A equal to 1, then I know that this one sparse detection and recovery algorithm passes the test and xab equal to B. But I want to say that if cardinality of A is not equal to 1, if there are more than 1 coordinates on which I have a non-zero entry, then this one sparse and detection and recovery algorithm does not pass the test with high probability. Okay, and so this is what we saw. The first part is easy, so forget it. So now if say mod 1 is not equal to 1, let's say what happens then? So let's consider the following polynomial f of j. What is this polynomial? Well, whatever I have stored in C, this is what I am stored in C, and whatever I expect C to store is this, right? If both values are like, so why did I pass the test? Well, I passed the test because whatever I stored at C is equal to whatever I expected it to store. Okay. Okay. Now, what is the degree of this polynomial? Is at most n, right? So I am failing because this polynomial f of j evaluates to 0, right? This is the only reason which I am failing, because whatever I stored at C and whatever I'm expecting to store at C, they're equal, right? So now I'm asking, if I think of this as a polynomial, then what is the probability that this polynomial will vanish? Well, if I have a degree n polynomial, then it can vanish only at its root, because it's a single variate polynomial in of degree at most n. Okay, but it means that it evaluates to 0 at random r with probability at most degree divided by the total number of space from which I am picking this number. Okay, and so the probability that probability that it will evaluate to 0 is 1 over n to the power c minus 1, which means that if there are two coordinates which are non-zero, then with very high probability you are not going to fail the test. And if you are not going to fail the test, with what probability? 1 minus 1 by n to the power c minus 1. Okay, so
one question. So
yes.
just to avoid mess, are the C the same or distinct?
Which C?
C, with in probability. Well, if you return to the algorithm, so you have C.
No, this C and this C should be different. Should be n to the power d, like some constant. If this is what you meant? Piotr, this is what? Yeah. No. This has nothing to do with this. I mean, this was my mistake. Okay, this C and this C, nothing. No, like you choose this D is in your hand, and you choose this D based on what is the probability you would like to boost. Okay, so if you want failure probability to like some n to the power 100, then you will choose like D to be like something like 100 plus 1. Okay, because then you will get that the probability of failure is like 1 over n to the power 100. So this C should actually be D. You were right, my mistake.
What happens if B is equal to 0?
What is equal to 0?
B. If there is no non-zero elements at all.
If there are no non-zero elements at all, okay? Look, B could be 0 for several reasons, okay? I could be that at one coordinate I have xi, and other coordinate I have minus xi. This could also be reason for it to be 0, right?
Yeah.
Okay, but then I have two coordinates, right?
Yes.
Right. So this will not pass the test with very high.
But how you divide by 0? I'm confused.
I'm not dividing by 0 anywhere, Ferrer. Where am I dividing by 0? Okay, I'm not dividing by 0.
Okay.
Right. So look. So look, what is this? So suppose you do get B equal to 0, right? Then you are getting B equal to 0 for two regions, right? If B equal to 0, you can always say that there are at least like either it is all 0 or it has at least two coordinates.
Yeah.
Right. So you could always figure you could always detect that, but I think the algorithm itself will detect this.
Okay.
Okay. Thanks. But you are never dividing by. But you are right. So what does it meaning of returning A by B? So I mean, maybe I should have said if B equal to 0, say fail. Like say either 0 or has at least two non-zero coordinates, right? So at least I know that it has more than one. Either it has no non-zero coordinate or it has more than greater or equal to two non-zero coordinates. Okay. Okay. Okay, so this was an idea for this, okay? And now we'll go back to L0 sampling. Now, how we are going to do L0 sampling? Well, what I'm going to do now for how we are going to maintain L0 sketching is as follows. So we are going to think of this that I want to actually do this one SDS algorithm, but in clever way. Okay, so what I do, so I pick up S0, S log n random subsets of 1 to n, okay, where each element I is in Si with probability 1 over 2i, right? So what will be, so think of this, suppose if I think of this as a sketch matrix, okay, and I have S0, I have S1 and S log n. Suppose I have this. Now what will be S0? If you notice, it is going to be all 1, right? Right? Now, why this is useful? Right? Now, notice that if my vector itself is very sparse, say it was exactly 1, right? It had exactly 1 entry. Then this will help us filter out that entry. Okay? You will see what I mean by this in a minute. But intuitively think that if my vector has exactly 1 non-zero entry, then I need this vector to filter that particular entry. Okay. What is S1? Well, I choose this to be roughly n over 2. Okay. Now imagine yourself that my what do you call my vector is like not exactly 1, but it has few number of 1s. Okay, then I hope that, well, either this or this will be able to exactly hit one element of that. Okay, and things of this nature. So now as I go further, because what is an expected number of 1s here? Expected number of 1s here is going to be roughly like n over 2. So, right? So in this, you're going to pick like, what is this random subsets here you're going to be equal to, right? So it is like, so what I mean by this, so think of this as 1 to n. If S0 is going to put 1, if that particular element is being selected in S0, right? It's basically a characteristic vector of 1 to n based on S0. So now if I look at S1, look at the characteristic vector of S0, characteristic vector of S1 and so on. But the expected size of S1 is going to be roughly n over 2 because I'm going to pick every element of 1 to n with probability half. S2 is going to be roughly going to be, so n over 2, n over 4, and look at S log n, right? What is going to be S log n? With roughly here, it will be like very, very sparse, like 1, right? So you notice that if I have a dense instance, like if I have a dense vector, I hope that these will be able to filter out one index from there, right? For example, if I had all non-zero, then I will use my last column to get an entry from that column, which is 1. So the intuition is that we have chosen enough filters that there will be one filter whose intersection with the vector which I'm trying to for which I'm trying to get an I and xi is exactly equal to 1. And if that is the case, then I should be able to recover that. Okay, so think of this, that what I'm so look at the column 1. So think of this S0 and x is a vector here. So I have S0 dot x, I have S0 S1 dot x, S2 dot x, dot S log n dot x. Okay, my belief is that what we will prove is that, well, given any x, okay, there exists an I such that if I look at Si dot x, okay, Si dot x, okay, the property of Si dot x, or rather, let's say Si intersection A, right? So Si is the coordinates, and what is A? Non-zero coordinates of x. There exists I such that Si intersection A is equal to exactly equal to 1. Okay, so now if this is the case, then I will use this Si and this A and their dot product to help us find one coordinate. So that is a top overview of how we are going to make this L0 sketching works. Okay. Okay. Any question? So roughly, what I'm going to do to sketch the vector x, for each s in S0 to S log n, we're going to compute A, okay, B, and C. Okay. So notice that for each S0, for each S in S0, I'm going to compute 3 numbers, right? And next, what I do, I'm going to say, look, S passes the test if A by B is in 1 to N and C is B or AB mod P. Okay. Right. So now notice that I'm not going to compute one number. I'm going to compute for each S 3 numbers. So basically, you will see in a minute. So I have one number corresponding to S0, 3 numbers corresponding to 0, S1, 3 numbers corresponding to S2, so on, and 3 numbers corresponding to S log n. And I say, look, S passes the test if the corresponding A by B is in N and C is this. I say, if all S do not pass the test, then I'm going to say output fell. Well, then I'm going to say that, okay. Then what I'm going to say to it, that maybe in that case, in some sense, it is telling us that, look, maybe all the coordinates are 0. Okay. This is what it means, because what is now our idea? Our objective is to output an index and a non-zero value. So what does a fail should mean? Fail should mean that, well, all the coordinates are 0. Otherwise, you pick up passing S. There is some S for which this test passes, and you claim that ABAth entry of X is B. That's it. Okay. So that is the goal. Okay. Now we will interleave the proof of what we did before in a much more detail. So this is my algorithm. Okay. If I have to really write the algorithm correctly, then this is how the algorithm will look like. So you have a random subset of n, where each element I is an SI with probability 1 over 2i. Let P be a prime again. Okay, now it's fine because some C. Okay, R in P chosen uniformly at random, and you have 3 numbers AK, BK, CK, where K is in log n. And while string is not empty, what you do that for J, AJ is a current update. You for each K in log n such that now look, now I'm doing slide. I'm not updating each ABC, but I'm going to only update those ABC for which, look at the coordinate J. Look at which all subsets this J is contained. I only update those, right? So for each K in log n such that J belongs to my random set, the coordinate, then I, then I increment A corresponding A power K, B power K, or it's not A power K, okay? It is just a symbol AK, okay? Maybe I should write this or something, just so that you do not think that it's a power or something, okay? It is the, like, okay, so there are like 3 numbers which I'm storing and I'm indexing with respect to first 0, 1, 2, and K. And that's it, okay? Now, what I'm doing for all K in log n, AK, BK is not n, or CK is not there, then you fail. Else, let T in log n such that ST passes the test, and you return AT, BT, and the corresponding test. Okay, this is my whole algorithm. So there are some caveat you have to understand. Okay, look, I'm picking S0, S log n, a random subset from here. Okay, so this is like, I mean, this is still fine because, I mean, you have to ask yourself question that how do you implement this? Okay, we'll come to that in a minute. Okay, but let's see why this algorithm is actually correct. Okay, so this is what, so it will be good for us that we view from this perspective and not from this like mess which I've written. Okay, But if someone really wishes to go back and look at it, that's a good place to look at. So now this is my definition of what I already put basic idea, and we'll work with this basic idea and see how it works. So analysis, if S passes the test, it does not make much error, okay? And if S passes the test, it does not make much error. This is what I have to show. And some S do pass the test with high probability, okay? So what I would like to say, let A be all those indexes such that the corresponding xi coordinate is the position of non-zero entries. If A intersection S equal to 1, right? If A intersection S equal to 1, then S passes the test and XAB equal to B. And if A intersection S is not equal to 1, then S does not pass the test with very high probability. Okay? So what I'm saying to you that let A be, you fix S, one of these S. Now, if A intersection of S is 1, then S will definitely pass the test, okay, with respect to with this A and S. But if A intersection S is more than 1, then trust me, with very high probability, that particular S is not going to pass my test, right? So now we'll just do some union bound and it will help us. So how do we go about proving this? Okay. So first one is okay, right? Because if A intersection S is 1, right? If A intersection S is 1, then you will definitely pass the test, because if A intersection some particular S is 1, right? Then this will correspond to some J times Xj, B will correspond to some Xj, and C will correspond to some Rj Xj mod B, right? So of course you will pass this test, and this is with you will pass this test with probability 1. So the bad case is, I would like to say that, look, if A intersection S is not equal to N, then S does not pass the test with a high probability. So this is okay. So this is what I want to say. This will correspond to this lemma. If S passes the test, it doesn't make much error. Now, what the second lemma will tell us to prove? That probability that A intersection S is 1 is at least some constant for some S. Okay, and we can boost this probability by having several such tests. Okay, but so second lemma corresponds to this. Some S do pass the test with high probability. So this is what means, or rather you say there exists S in blah blah such that probability that A intersection S is equal to 1 is at least 1. Okay, so I need both these two lemma for our algorithm to be correct or to succeed. Okay, if S passes the test, it doesn't make much error, and some S do pass the test with high probability. Okay, any question? And this lemma proof we actually have seen before. Okay, so first part is easy. If A intersection S is not 1, then you again then basically you consider the polynomial Fj. But now remember, now I'm only looking at those coordinates which belongs to X, F, and this is also a non-zero polynomial of degree at most n, false positive if Fr equal to 0, but it evaluates at 0 at random R with probability at most this, basically number of roots, right? So I have bounded this with some 1 over n to the power c. So this is fine. So part 1 analysis is exactly taken from how we did it for one test, right? Now, what is an interesting question is, why will some test, like some S intersection with A, is actually going to be equal to 1 with high probability? Okay, so this is what we would like to show. Okay, let's see. Okay, so I want to pick I such that, remember what was A? Like these are non-zero coordinates of A. So I look at A. So I pick an index I such that mod A, cardinality of mod A is at least 2 to the power I minus 2, but strictly less than 2 to the power I minus 1. Okay, so I choose one of such I. I'm going to claim to you that probability that A intersection Si is 1. So I'm telling you which Si you should consider. So you look at A, such that the number of non-zero coordinates is between 2 power I minus 1 by 2 and less than some 2 power I minus 1. Then you look at the next SI, probability of A intersection SI is going to be 1. Okay. So now let's see. So what is the probability that A intersection SI equal to 1 means? So look at J in A. So what you want to say? Probability that J belongs to SI and K does not belong to SI for all K in A minus J. Right? This is exactly what it means. Right? That what is the probability that A intersection SI is equal to 1? Well, it means that it can contain, SI should contain one of the entries in A and it doesn't contain any other entries which are in A. So this is basically precisely you sum over J in A and this. Now, what is this? Okay. Now, let's see why this is equal to this. Now, for each element, how did you constructed each SI? Well, you were putting each element in SI with probability 1 over 2 power I, right? Now, what you want, and look, and this was the independent event. They were like with respect to each, they were independent event, right? So it was full independence, right? So it did not depend for the next element whether you picked before or not. So probability that you selected J is 1 over 2 power I, and you did not select some other K is 1 minus 1 by 2 power I mod A minus 1. Okay, this is what it is. So this is what, so this is equal to mod A 2 power I 1 minus 1 by 2 power I mod A minus 1. Okay. Now, what I would like to say is, let's see. Okay. Now, what can we say about these things? Okay. Let me be a bit more, I mean, maybe 1 by 8 proof is a little bit more cumbersome, but let's prove that it is at least something 1 over some constant. Okay. And that is not very hard to see. Why? Because what I would like to say, okay, is the following. Okay. So can I say this? That this quantity is greater than equal to mod A 2 power I 1 minus 1 by 2 power I to the power 2 power I. Is this fine? Is this okay? Because, I mean, because this quantity is at least, this quantity is at least mod A divided by 2 power I 1 minus 1 by 2 power I to the power A, right? And look, this is some number which is less than 1. So you take as much more and more power you take, right? You will get smaller and smaller number. So this is fine. Now, what is this? 1 minus 1 by x to the power x is roughly 1 over e. Okay. So what will you get now? But look at what is mod A. I want to use mod A is at least 2 power I minus 2 divided by 2 power I greater than equal to this and 1 over e. So this is like something like 1 over 4e, which is like something 1 over 16 or something. But if you do some careful analysis, you can get 1 over 8. Okay, but that's not the point. Okay, so what we have been able to show that with constant probability, there exists some S in our filter that whatever may be the vector it is, we have been able to get out one coordinate, exactly one coordinate of this when I intersect with S. So this is like think of this as a random filtering process. Okay. Now, how can we boost the probability from 1 by 8 to 1 minus 1 by nc? By repeating the process order log n times in parallel. What I mean by this, like, well, you do not pick one S0, right? For each S, you pick S01, S02, S0 log n. You pick S11, S12, S like some C log n, S1, some C log n, so on and so forth, right? Now, well, what is the probability that you are like for each, so when I say, I know the probability A intersection S is equal to 1, right? So what is the probability that if I look at SI1, SI2, SIC log n, all of them you fail, right? Well, this fails, and this fails, and this fails, and this fails, and this fails. Well, that will be like some 1 over n to the power c. So you can boost the whole probability by 1 minus 1 by nc. And this is why, if you notice, that the matrix which we chose had only 3 log n column. But it is this boosting which forces you to have a matrix who has size order log square n times n dimension. Okay. Okay. But we use full randomness here. How do you go from full to limited? Because otherwise you are going to use lots and lots of space, right? Because then I mean, maybe for graph algorithms, maybe it is okay. But the kind of applications where we need to use, if you recall, we need to have space right? Like it is a space efficient data structure. It is like you only going to store some order log square n bit or like something of this nature. But if I'm going to, if I go and implement my current algorithm, I cannot do this because of the reason is, okay, let's see what the algorithm is. Okay, what is this algorithm? You're going to pick these subsets, random subsets of n, like, so if you're going to keep these random subset explicitly, this itself is going to take you n polylog n. I mean, as I said, this could be okay for graph algorithm, but it may not be okay for the other kind of applications where it is used. Just I'll come in a minute. Okay, so now what we will do is that we will implement this algorithm using limited independence. So let's see. Okay, and at this point of time, you should remember the concept of geometric streaming, sampling, right? We did this for counting number of distinct elements, right? What was this? So it was the main idea was pick a hash function from n to 0 to from n to 0 log n from a two-wise independent family with elements having geometrically decreasing probability, right? So you wanted probability hi equal to j with 1 over 2 power j plus 1 if j is less than log n and 1 over n. And how did we do this? Well, if you remember, we implemented such h by selecting h prime n to n from a two-wise independent hash family and defining hi to the index of least significant bit of h prime I written in binary. Okay, so for example, h prime I here is, if this is the written in binary, what is the least significant bit? 0, 1, 2, 3. The first index, which is 1. So hi is 3, right? But we will do slightly differently here. Okay, so now to define S0, S1, S log n, I'm going to pick h from a two-wise independent family of hash function. And if I have a h from a two-wise independent family of hash function, how much space it will take? Well, it will take some order log n. right? You just need two numbers, A, B, and P maybe. So 3 numbers, and you just do AX plus B mod P. Okay. And now what I'm going to define SI, all those X in N, if HX is divisible by 2 power I. Okay. So this is my SI. So given H, I can define what my SI is. All those coordinates such that if I look at H of X, it is divisible by 2 power I. Okay. So now let's define a probability. So gamma I, what is the probability that J belongs to SI? Well, if you notice that this is a 2-wise independent family of hash function, right? Which implies that over N, okay, here it is the prime number P which we have selected, like from where? So this P, right? This number H is uniformly at random. What is the meaning of that? So this is my function H from N to P. Okay. Now this number can take any number from 1 to P with probability 1 over P. Okay. Now let's ask ourselves, when an index J will belong to SI? Well, an index J will belong to SI if H of X is divisible by 2i, 2 powered I. Well, so what number do I find, right? So basically, if I think of this P, well, look at all those numbers which are divisible by 2 power I, 2 power I, 2 power I, 2 power I. How many such numbers are there? Well, roughly, if I had to say, I would say roughly P power 2 power I divided by P, right? So this is approximately 1 over 2 power I. So probability that some index belongs to SI, well, when will that index belong to SI? Well, if that index is divisible by 2 power I. How many such numbers are there from 1 to P? Well, roughly P over 2 power I. Okay? Any question? Okay. So this is what gamma I will be. Okay? Okay, that is what is the probability that J belongs to SI is roughly 1 over 2 power I. And this is why it is equivalent to implementing that. Okay, so now this is how we have selected our S0 S log n. Okay, now I would like to say again, look, there will be no problem with the first part of the proof. But now we have to say that if this is how you have selected your S, what is the probability that A intersection S equal to 1 for some S in S0 S log n? Okay. So now I again say that, look, whatever behavior the random subset had, now whatever subset now you have defined S0, S1, S log n with the help of your hash function, its behavior is exactly the same. Okay. You will see in a minute. So now I still claim that, well, look at the cardinality of a non-zero entry, and between this, well, the corresponding SI, probability that A intersection SI is 1 is at least some constant. Okay. So again, so J belongs to A means J belongs to SI, and K does not belong to SI for all K in A minus J. Okay. Now, if you condition on the fact that J belongs to SI, then what are you saying? K does not belong to SI for all K in A minus J times gamma I, right? So you condition on the fact that this, so this is basically just by the definition of conditioning probability that, look, what is probability A intersection B? I can also write as, or rather say probability A intersection B is probability A intersection B divided by probability B. So this, think of this as A intersection B, right? J belongs to SI and all these does not belong to SI. Well, that is same as saying probability A, what is the probability that this happens given that J belongs to SI times what is the probability of B. Okay, so this is exactly equal. Okay. Now, what I would like to say, okay, this is a bit of mouthful. I want to say that this number what is this quantity? Let's try to understand what is this quantity. Well, I want to say that, look, so gamma I is gamma I, and I want to say that this quantity, whichever is given, is at least this. Okay, is like, I mean, look, this is, I want to prove a lower bound, right? So I want to say that whatever this probability is, okay, this quantity is actually smaller than this quantity. Okay. Now let's ask ourselves, what is this telling us, right? Well, what is this telling us? If you think of set of vectors, okay, think of set of vectors, like what is this selection telling us? Okay, well, okay, how to, let me think for a minute. Okay, what is this tells us? Okay, what is this tells us? Okay, look, this tells us that, look, suppose this is how I fixed an SI. Okay, I fixed an SI. Now, what are the good candidates? What will be the good, let's say, no, this is not how I should say. Okay, let's see. How do I want to say? Okay, so let's ask ourselves, okay, so what are the possible sets SIs are, right? Those are basically subsets of 2 power n, okay? This is basically all subsets of 2 power n are the possible subsets. Now, what are good SIs? Those subset whose intersection with A is exactly 1. Okay, so let's say these are my good SIs. Okay, now these are my good SIs. Okay, now what is outside this? What is any set here? What is any set here? What is the property of any set here? Well, there must be a coordinate. Why this doesn't? There must be those sets which contains at least 2. I mean, those are those sets which contains at least 2 coordinates from A. Okay, this is what it is. Now, what is this terms tells us? Let's try to understand. What is this terms tells us from here to here? Probability. So this is given that J belongs to SI. What are these sets? What are these sets? K does not belong to SI for all K in A minus J, right? This is what it is. So now, what are these sets are? So these sets are basically, let's say, okay, so let's try to understand what are these sets are. Okay, I know this is a bit of torture, but this is fine. K in A minus J. Okay, so K does not belong to SI for all K in A minus J. Okay, it is K does not belong to SI for this. Okay, let's see. Okay, so suppose I wanted to, okay, so these are those sets, those are good sets whose intersection with AI is exactly 1. So what are outside? Those are those sets, okay, those are those sets whose intersection with A is at least 2. Now, what is this is telling us? Well, so now what I'm saying here is that suppose I wanted to compute the probability of these sides, right? Because that will give me a lower bound, like if I knew here some upper bound, then it will give me a lower bound on this probability. But what are these sets? These are those sets which contains, well, at least 2 elements. So this is exactly what it is. K is in SI and J is in SI. But notice that all those 2 element sets contains many more sets. So it could contain like all those sets which contains both K and J. Well, it will contain, cover this part. Okay, why? Because there could be some set, or definitely it doesn't contain anything here, but it contains something outside this. Okay, because it contains 2 things, K and J. But it could also contain all those sets which contains K, J and L. So when I fix some other J1, what will I get? Maybe I will get something outside, but maybe I will also get something which is here. So this is why this is like a union bound. If you look at the union bound of event, and this is why this is at least this much, because all I'm saying that if I take 1 minus this, then I'm able to cover all the part which is outside this red zone, and maybe I'm covering them with sets which overlaps. Okay, so this is exactly what it is trying to say here. So if you do not understand this, try yourself from here to here. But now this is the one place where we will use the fact that what we have is 2-wise independent. So probability that K belongs to SI and J this. So what is this? This is probability A intersection B divided by probability B, right? Now, because these are 2-wise independent, probability of A times probability of B divided by probability of B. So this gets cancelled. So this is what you get. This is equality. Okay. Okay. So this is equality. Now you ask yourself, what is the probability that K belongs to SI? Well, this is gamma I. And so for each of them, so how many such objects are there? 1 minus mod A minus 1 times gamma I times gamma I. Okay. Okay. Let's see. Okay. 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 So now, okay, leave it here. Okay, let's go here and let's see what happens. Now, what I do is that I take out this outside, okay, gamma I, and I leave this inside. Okay. Now, what I can say, because of, look, this is mod A minus 1 times gamma I. So this is summation over, I can write it down, 1 minus mod A times gamma I. Okay, this I can write. Now this happens, what is the summation? This is at least gamma I times mod A times 1 minus mod A times gamma. This is equality. Now, what do I know about gamma I? Gamma I is roughly 1 over 2 power I. Okay, what is the cardinality of A is 1 over, what is the cardinality of lower bound I'm using? So 2 power I minus 2. This is the one which I've used. Now, I want to use here, like, what is the most I can decrease from here is 1 minus, what is gamma j is roughly 2 power I, and this is 2 power I minus 1. So this time I use lower bound. So if you do this, what is this? This is equal to 1 over 4, and this is equal to half. So this is 1 over 8. Okay, at least. So you are done. Okay. So basically, I mean, even if you do not understand the computation, it is perfectly fine. So what we have been able to show to ourselves is that if you do this random sampling, okay, if you do this random sampling algorithm, then geometric sampling algorithm, then you are guaranteed that you will hit an index with some set whose intersection is 1. And I think this idea of filtering out single element should not only be bound to these applications, but it should have applications well beyond whatever we have learned. Okay. So this is what basically L0 sampling means. Okay. So I think I will take a few minutes break and then we will move on to the next topic. Okay. Next algorithms. Okay. So now what I would like to do is this very recent work on graph coloring by Sefer Asadi, Yu Chen, Sanju Khanna, and this is called Sublinear Algorithms for Delta 1 Vertex Coloring, and this was in SODA 2019. And this paper got Best Paper Award for this. Okay, so I hope everybody knows what C coloring of a graph is, right? Graph G is, okay. So C coloring of graph G is nothing but you have a palette of colors, say 1, 2, C. Okay, this is my palette, and what I want to do, palette, and what I want to do, assign colors to vertices, okay, such that no edge is monochromatic. Okay, so this is what is called C coloring of a graph. Okay, and I'm not going to motivate you why it is important and this, but it is an important problem. Okay, so there is one of the most basic theorem in graph theory is or graph algorithm is that any graph G with maximum degree delta is delta plus 1 colorable. Proof. Anybody? Proof?
Assuming a contradiction?
Okay. Can't you give an algorithm rather than algorithmic proof? Because that will be nice. Okay, let's assume with contradiction.
Take
You
one
can do
vertex,
greedy circuit.
give it one color, and it's all delta neighbor put different colors.
Okay, good. Yeah, so yes, greedy.
Yes.
And this is my point. So greedy, okay? And it is an ultra greedy actually, okay? Like suppose you have a G, what I mean by ultra greedy, you have a partially colored graph, okay? You pick any vertex V, okay? You know that, look at already partially colored neighbors. If you have a palette of 1 to delta plus 1, right? By pigeonhole principle, some color is left. Right? Some color is left, so color it with that. Right? I mean, so this is definitely a delta plus 1 coloring, greedy, and linear time. And by linear time, I mean order n plus n. Excellent. In fact, if you know Brooks' theorem, then Brooks' theorem says that except click and odd cycles, all graphs of degree delta is of maximum degree delta is delta colorable. Okay, I'm not going to prove this, but for us this is enough. Now let's ask ourselves, so this is a basic graph algorithm, okay, and it was an open question for long time whether it contains, okay, let's see, contain or admits, not contains, admits semi-streaming algorithm, okay, or what is also called sublinear algorithms. Okay, so I will explain to what I mean by sublinear algorithms. Okay, So semi-streaming algorithm is actually a relaxation of sublinear algorithms in some sense. So in semi-streaming algorithm, you at least get to see the stream completely. But in sublinear algorithms, you basically query some adjacency queries. And there are like other models also, but let's say adjacency queries. And it's like, can I come up with an algorithm which asks, say, n to the power 2 minus epsilon queries? So that basically it means that can I reduce my problem? Like I want to find a greedy coloring of this graph, okay, even without seeing all the edges, right? So this is what one should think of these algorithms as, okay? That I want to color these guys even without this, okay? So this is why this paper was considered a breakthrough, because if you look at other similar problems, okay, what is that called? I think maximal independent set or even maximal matchings, you cannot do these things in this like efficiently, okay? So it was not known and it was considered a very hard problem that cannot be solved by single pass streaming algorithm, okay? Notice that it is almost impossible to make this greedy algorithm run in streaming algorithm because it is inherently sequential. Because when I'm trying to color this, guys, I must look into all its neighbors which have previously been colored and do this, okay? So it was very, very surprising, and it is extremely non-trivial algorithm, okay? And so this is what I'm not going to prove the algorithm which they proved, but I'm slightly simplification of this, but it will still tell us the kind of combinatorics one can prove about these classical problems, okay? So this is what I'm going to use the word, what I'm going to call palette sparsification, okay? Palette sparsification, okay? What is the meaning of this, okay? Palette, what is the spelling of palette? Okay. Sparsification. Okay, this is a very, very cool algorithm. Okay. So look, I only understood it very well today morning. So this is why I have no slides. Okay, maybe it is useful. Okay. So first, let's believe. Okay, so first let's prove some. Let's say combinatorial statement. Okay. So what is the combinatorial statement we can say? Okay. So the combinatorial statement is, let's do the following thing, and this is non-adaptive, okay? And this has nothing to do with algorithm. This is basically a graph theory statement. So now, for each V, okay, select, say, let's say select some alpha log n, let's call it S, equal to alpha log n colors from delta plus 1. Okay, this is what I've done. Okay, for all V in V, I'm going to select delta plus 1 colors uniformly at random. Okay, so do you understand what I did? So for all V, I have a palette LV, which is a subset of delta plus 1. Okay, okay. Of S colors. Okay, I do this in the beginning, like even if the algorithm is started or not, nothing. Okay, so you do this. Okay, now what are you saying? Now let's consider the following conflict graph. Okay, so what is my conflict graph? My conflict graph is the following. Okay, so suppose I had a graph, okay, like this. Okay. Now I have the same graph at this point of time. Okay. Okay. Now for every vertex, look, in the beginning, he had all delta plus 1 color available. But now he had some, say, suppose this is V1. So we have LV1, this is V2. So I say LV2, V3, V4, LV3, LV4. Okay. Okay. Now what I'm going to say is the following. What is my conflict graph? I check. Look at the edge UV. So look at the edge V1, V2. Okay. I say edge V1, V2 is conflicting if list of V1 intersection list of V2 is not equal to empty. What is the meaning of this? So I have currently some list of colors, potential colors for V1, potential colors that I would like to give to V2. So think of this, that I'm going to reduce normal coloring to list coloring. Okay, this is what I'm going to do. And how is list given? So I have selected my list. And I would like to say that, look, I'm only going to color my vertices with the colors which are in my list, okay, which I have selected. Now, notice that if there's an edge V1, V2, when can then that edge be conflicting? Well, there's a possibility that I could give both. If look at the corresponding list, if they have a common intersection, it is possible that I might end up giving to this edge same colors, like endpoints of this edge. So this is my potential conflicting edge. So I keep this. But imagine if I have an edge that their corresponding lists are disjoint. Can that edge either become monochromatic if I give you a list coloring of this? You get my point? Right? So now maybe if I suppose, so this is my point, that suppose LV1 intersection LV2 is not equal to empty set. But maybe LV2, say, intersection LV4 is empty. LV3 intersection LV2 is equal to empty. And say list V4 intersection list V1 is not equal to empty. Is not equal to empty. Then my conflicting graph is going to have the same set of vertices. But now what edges will I keep? I will keep V1, V2 edge. V2, V4 edge, I don't have to put because their lists are disjoint. V3, V2 edge, I don't have to put because that is disjoint. V4, V1 edge, I have to put because they are not disjoint. And say that V4, V3 edge is disjoint. V4 intersection LV3 is equal to 5. Right? So this is my conflict graph. Right? So what this theorem tells, that for each V in V, select this LV, okay, and construct the conflict graph, okay, conflict graph H, okay. Then it says, first, with high probability, okay, with high probability, okay, with high probability, okay, maximum degree of H is roughly order log square n, okay. With high probability, okay, with high probability, what do you call? With high probability, okay, H is list colorable if and only if G is delta plus 1 colorable. Okay, so what is this combinatorial statement tells us? The combinatorial statement tells us that, look, basically what it tells us that given any graph G, there exists a subgraph of G, say H, where and there exists a list of size some order log n for each, such that if you solve a list coloring problem there, then that will correspond to a proper coloring of G. Okay? So I shouldn't say if and only if. With high probability, if H is list colorable, then G is delta plus 1 colorable. Okay. So this is what it is called palette sparsification. Okay, because what you have done that you have sparsified your palette from delta plus 1 to some order log n, right, for each vertex. And now what are you saying? Look at the consider the conflicting graph. Okay, if you are able to list colored conflicting graph, okay, so look, if you are able to list colored conflicting graph, then definitely G is delta plus 1 colorable. But if with high probability, if G is delta plus 1 colorable, okay, then H is list colorable. This is the right statement to say. Okay, if G is delta plus 1 colorable, then H is less colorable. Okay, so this combinatorial statement is at the heart of this proof. Okay,
The question.
Yes.
But G is always delta plus 1 colorable.
Yes, Ferrer. G is always delta plus 1 colorable.
So then what does it mean if G is delta plus 1 colorable?
Okay, let's say with high, so this is not a statement, this is with high probability, H is list colorable. Okay. This is it. You're right. It doesn't need to say anything. With high probability, H is list colorable. Right? So think of this way. I have reduced my problem on dense graphs to sparse graph, right? Because H has maximum degree order log square n, right? So the total number of edges in this graph is going to be something like order n log square n, right? And what I'm saying, if I can color this guy, then I can do this. Okay. Okay. So this is what these people proved actually. Okay. This proof is very highly non-trivial, and I mean, it's not something which I can teach in this class. So I will relax myself. And what I will make relax myself. Okay. I will relax myself as follows. Okay. So let me write down the algorithm and then we will analyze this algorithm. Okay. Okay. So what I would like to do is the following. Okay. So this is our algorithm. Okay. Let us write down this algorithm. If you do not, if you have any question with respect to algorithm, then we will check. So for every vertex V in V, sample a set LV of S equal to say 4 log n colors from 1 to 2 delta, okay, uniformly at random and independently. Okay, that's the first thing. Second thing, now this is my algorithm. During the stream, what I do, so notice I did this in the beginning itself, before even my algorithm started for every vertex I have chosen. So there are some questions you have to worry about. Who gives you delta? Okay. Who gives us delta, right? Okay. So for now, assume we know delta. We can get rid of this condition. It's very, we know delta. Okay. So what did my algorithm did? In the beginning itself, it sampled a set of 4 log n colors uniformly at random and independently from 1 to 2 delta. Okay. So I'm going to prove the same statement which is palette sparsification does, but with respect to 2 delta colors, not with respect to delta plus 1. That is a bit non. And in fact, we will be able to show this for any 1 plus epsilon delta. But let's. So during the stream, store any edge UV in subgraph H, okay, if list of U intersection list of V is not equal to phi. So this is what I do. At the end of the stream, okay, I will do the following. Actually, this is also a greedy algorithm applied. Okay, go over vertices of V in some arbitrary order. Okay, B, for any vertex V, if list of V is equal to empty set, output fail. Okay, otherwise what will we do? I will do color V from any color, okay, C in LV, and remove C from any neighbor U of V in H, right? So basically this is a greedy coloring. What I'm doing at any point of time, I look at my vertex, I check, is your list empty? Then I cannot list color this graph, right? Fine. Otherwise, this list is non-empty. I color this vertex with any color I like. And then from all its neighbors in H, I remove that color. That's it, right? So this is my algorithm. Is the algorithm clear, right? And this I can do this in the streaming in n polylog space easily. For now, just even assume that edges, like it is just an edge insertion model, right? And we will worry about how to get rid of, so two things, how to get rid of this idea that only edges are added and not deleted. We'll get rid of that later. Secondly, who gives us delta? So we need to take care of these two. But given these two, is the algorithm clear? What are we doing? For each V in V, we sampled some 4 log in colors, okay, beforehand, okay, and during the stream, we stored any edge UV in subgraph which corresponding list intersects. So this is how constructed edge. And at the end of the stream, I go over all the vertices in an arbitrary order. And if I can color this vertex, then I color by the corresponding color and remove that color from consideration from any of its neighbors. That's it. End of the story. Okay, this is my algorithm. Okay. Okay, so what happens that, look, many of the, so what are you not storing in the edge? You are not storing precisely those edges for which the corresponding sets are disjoint. Okay. Okay. And yeah, so, right. But what this algorithm tells us that if I started with a, say for example, if I started with a click, right? Click has n square edges, but it is only going to store some n log n color, n log n edges, going to give a list color to this set. And well, look at your, if I'm able to list color this small subgraph, I'm able to color my click. Now, notice that if I have a click on n vertex, I need n colors. So there I actually need delta plus 1 colors. So somehow here I must be using all the delta plus 1 colors in this graph edge, right? Right? So intuitively, if you like, this is magical that something of this nature happens. Okay, but this is a great sparsification in some sense. Okay, okay. So one point you should notice, something which is very important, is if H is list colorable, definitely G is list colorable. So G is colorable, right? Because the one, so now if H you're able to color with your list, you put back all the edges which you deleted. That graph, like this particular list coloring also is a proper coloring of G, because look at any edge which you deleted. Okay, if you put back, look at the endpoints of the colors. Well, they had lists which were disjoint, so the colors which this particular edge has got are also different, and hence we are fine. So if H is list colorable, and I told you which particular algorithm, like in a streaming setting, you do not even care about how do you actually, by definition, you do not even care about how you color this. If I would have proved there exists a good coloring, I would have been done. But actually, I gave you a particular algorithm which is greedy. This is what I will do. Even this greedy algorithm will do very well. Okay? Okay. Any question? Okay. If nobody has a question, then let me go. Okay. Okay. So this is a lemma, first lemma, which we would like to prove is the graph is sparse. Okay. The number of edges in the subgraph H is order n log square n with high probability. And remember, whenever we say with high probability, it is always 1 minus 1 over n to the power some constant. Right? This is what I mean by it. Okay. This is what we will prove. Okay. One lemma. So this will tell us that this is good. Okay. And now another lemma which will be prove is the following. So this will tell us that H is sparse. Okay. Now we have to say, what about the correctness of the algorithm? Well, notice as I told you before, okay, the only region we can't say anything is that our list coloring algorithm outputs fail. Right? Right? That's the only time I can't say anything, right? Right? Go over vertices of V. For any vertex B, if list of V is not empty, like I'm going to output fail with respect to this algorithm, right? One region we can't say anything is that our list algorithm outputs fail. I would like to prove that this is my lemma 2. Okay. With high probability, algorithm 1 does not output fail. Okay. Okay. The reason why I actually try to teach you this is because it reminded me something from old. Okay. So let's see. Okay. The proof of second lemma is quite cute, and I thought that I'll tell you first that, and then we'll go back and prove the other one. So let's see. Okay, so let's try to prove this. Okay. So suppose this is an arbitrary order, V1, V2, Vi, and so on and so forth. Okay. Okay. Notice that the way the algorithm has constructed, it constructed its lists uniformly at random and independently. Okay. 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 I'm going to say, okay, look at the corresponding list LVI. Okay. I'm going to say that look, a colored in C is good if it is not used on one of its neighbors. Right? Okay. And now think that, look, the way I'm sampling L, I can think that when I'm doing this algorithm, we are sampling list corresponding to Vi now. Okay. Because it is independent. So it doesn't matter. I mean, like, think that, okay, we are going to select now. Okay. So you ask yourself, how many neighbors of Vi could be earlier? Do we know a bound? This is delta. Okay. So now you ask yourself, what is the probability that list of V contains no good color? You tell me. Right? What is the probability that LV contains no good color? Well, okay. Why LV contains no good colored? LVI, sorry. Okay. So look at Vi, look at its neighbors. Right? LVI contains no good colored. Well, suppose it had neighbor L neighbors. So basically, I pick first vertex in my list. Okay, that happens with probability L by 2 delta because I chose this particular one of the colors which is used already on my neighbors. Great. Next time, I choose another color because it's without replacement, right? Or even with replacement, it would not have matter much. I pick among these bad L minus 1 colors 2 delta minus 1, right? And so on and so forth. And till when? Because I choose S colors, right? So somewhere I would have done some like L minus S, 2 delta minus S. Okay. But now this is less than equal to what is L upper bounded by? Delta, right? So this is half. L minus of 2 delta minus 1 is also upper bounded by half. Why? Because, I mean, look, bad guy has decreased by 1 and 2 delta minus, this is more. So this is actually more than half. Okay. Like this is less than half. Okay. But definitely what I can say that this probability is upper bounded by 1 over 2. How many times? S times. So what is this? 1 over 2 to the power S. Now I chose S as 4 log n. So this is 1 over n to the power 4, right? Okay. So now let's take union bound over all V. Okay. So my algorithm fails because there exists some Vi which does not contain a good color, right? Well, so that is upper bounded by 1 over n to the power 4 times n, which is like 1 over n cube. So I'm going to succeed with probability 1 minus 1 over n cube. Done. Okay. Is this fine? Okay. So what requires a little bit of hard work is the first one. The number of edges in the subgraph is this. Okay. So let's try to sketch a proof for this. Okay, and then we'll end. Okay. It is not very hard. Okay. So I want to prove the following lemma. Okay. Number of edges in H is order n log square n with high probability. Okay. Okay. So, I mean, Okay. Okay. So now what I'm going to show that delta of H is less than equal to some big O of log square n. This is what I'm going to show. Okay. For proof. This is what I'm going to show. So you fix a vertex V and fix a color LV. Okay. Now look at the neighbors U of V, and I'm going to have a random variable XU in 0, 1. And what is the property of this random variable? Well, XU takes 1 if LU intersection LV is not equal to phi. Right? Or the other, which is same as saying if and only if U and V are neighbor in H. Right? Okay. So for U to be neighbor of F, we know that LU intersection LV shouldn't be empty. So now let's ask ourselves, what is the probability that XU is equal to 1? Okay. What is the probability that XU equal to 1? Like you can do several things, but let's say this is less than equal to, right? I go over all C in LV, and I'll tell you why we are doing summation. Probability C is in LU, right? So why XU is 1? Because there exists some color in my list LV, so I should have put some conditional probability, but that doesn't matter. But this is just by union bound, because look, there could be several lists. All I'm saying that, look, why XU is 1? XU is 1 because there exists a color in the list of V which is also present in the list of U, right? Probability that C belongs to LU. Now, what is this number? I claim this number is equal to a square by 2 delta. Why? Well, what is the probability that C belongs to LU? Well, it means you have this 2 delta palette, okay? You have this 2 delta palette, okay? Now what are you doing? You have this 2 delta palette, you have fixed a color, C belongs to LU. So for C to belong, how many other subsets are there which you have a choice to pick? 2 delta minus 1. So this I can write down, summation C in LV, 2 delta minus 1, choose S minus 1, right? And right? So these are, but from how many such sets you are choosing is 2 delta over 2 delta, choose S, right? So this is my total set, and these are my good sets, those sets which contains LU. So I fix this U, and from remaining I pick F minus 1. But this summation is over S because I picked up for each vertex exactly F elements. So this I can say is equal to S times whatever this quantity is. And if you do the maths correctly, I think you will get some 2 delta minus 1 factorial, S minus 1 factorial, 2 delta minus 1 minus S minus 1 factorial times, if my understanding is correct, it should be S factorial, 2 delta minus S factorial, right? 2 delta factorial, right? And this is equal to S times, look, S factorial and S minus 1 factorial will give us another one S, okay? And no. This and this will give us 1, so this is S square. And 2 delta minus 1 minus S minus 1 is like minus 1 will get cancelled, so it is 2 delta minus S factorial. So what will happen is that this way and this will get cancelled, and so you will get S square by 2 delta, because 2 delta minus 1 factorial, and with 2 delta you will get exactly this, Okay. 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 Now, I mean, I'm just giving you idea for the proof. Okay. So what is the degree of H in V? It's basically this summation of this random variable XU, U in neighborhood of G of V in G. This is what it is. Okay. Now, so what is an expected degree of V in H? What is an expected degree of this in Vase? Well, we know that XU are indicator random variable, and probability that XU equal to 1 is at most S square by log n. So expectation is at most delta times S square by delta square by 2 delta, which is equal to 8 log square n. Right? Because it is 16 log square n, so divided by 2. Now, what you know about degree of HV? This is sum of 0, 1 indicator random variable, okay, right, which are independent. So now I can throw Chernoff bound. Okay, and by Chernoff bound, what it will imply is that probability that degree of HV, it's say more than or greater than equal to 16 times log square n is less than equal to 2 times e power minus 16 log square n by 3, which is less than 1 over n to the power 5. Okay, now you take again union bound over all vertices. Okay, and that will say that with probability at least 1 minus 1 to the power n by 4, every vertex has degree less than equal to 16 log square n. Okay, and then you're done. Okay, okay. So notice one thing, that where did we use 2 delta? Right? I mean, 2 delta is just not used very properly here. I could have taken, like this proof would have worked even if I would have taken 1 plus epsilon delta. Okay, my previous proof also would have worked here. I would have worked here also if I would have taken not 2 delta, but I would have taken 1 plus epsilon delta. Then it would have been, say, 1 by 1 plus epsilon to the power s. So of course, I mean, I will have to choose larger constants in the like the list size, but smaller constant or bigger constant, whatever this will tell us. But I could have chosen any of these things. Okay, 2 delta is not a magic number. Okay, so so this is what is the basically a proof. But what I liked about is this beautiful property of palette sparsification, which essentially tells us that you independently selectively pick subsets of these guys. Okay, and it is important that you pick 2 delta. Okay, plus 1. Okay, so now you can ask yourself a question. Well, okay, I will tell you next time how to get rid of the requirement of delta and how to make this algorithm work in streaming set, like turnstile model. But before that, I want to make some comments. Okay, so this algorithm, this palette sparsification also works if for all v you choose from the list of delta plus 1, okay, of size some big O of log n. Okay, then also it works. This is the proof of the main technical part of the proof, and they actually show that you actually need omega log n sized degree, okay, if you wish to say that with high probability H colorability, list colorability, like H is list colorable. So you need you need to sample at least some omega log n colors from this delta plus 1. Then there was a later paper by Elon and Sefer, I think in Random 2020. And they asked that suppose the kind of regime I was talking about, what about if I pick from some 1 plus epsilon delta? Okay, then do I need to do order log n colored? No, they came up with something like, then you can do it with some square root log n by some epsilon square or something big O of this. So even if you do just like sample these many colors, the list coloring instance you will get with high probability is list colorable. Okay, so this is what they proved, and even this is tight. They were able to come with a family of graph for this is tight. Okay, okay. So the big open question here is that can you do this deterministically? Okay. So I personally believe that for a lot of CSPs and this and that, these kind of sparsification could be very useful even from the people who are working in parameterized complexity and this and that. But at least I like this very nicely sparse. And the proof, as you see, like actually I gave you all the details of the proof. Okay, there's nothing that I hid from you. Okay, so there was one choice that you basically say that look, the way the independence is, okay, the degree is not too high. And second argument was that, well, when you are arbitrarily coloring from left to right, you still have enough colors that this. And intuitively what happens is that, look, if the graph had say root n, maximum degree is like root n or something. Now, there are so many subsets are there that, and there are so many vertices which are far apart from each other if the maximum degree is small, that chances that you will, like locally you're able to find lots of disjoint subsets is very high. And when things which are far apart from each other, like distance more than distance 1, I don't care anyway. So those are like independent objects. And this is also what is exploited quite a lot in the proof of Elon and all. So next time what I will do is start with this, teach you the trick, very nice trick of how to get rid of this delta condition first. Secondly, how to get rid of this constraint that edge insertion model. And third, give you an idea how could one go and approach proof for sparsification lemma. So that is my goal for a palette sparsification lemma. Okay, so this is what I wanted to tell for now. So if until there is any question, then I'm done for the day.
Yes, Saget, a question.
Yes.
So you can also do a coloring, which is at most degeneracy of the graph plus 1, right?
Yes, Fedor.
So what is known about this type of specifications?
So there was a paper in ICAL 2020 which does for degeneracy 1 plus epsilon time degeneracy. Fedor. Okay. Mm-hmm. So degeneracy plus 1, nobody knows.
Okay. That's nice.
Look, it's an amazing, right? This is an algorithm which we all know. And so one thing which I did not tell is that if you are in the query model, in the sense that you will only ask me, is Ij adjacent? Okay. Then to make this conflict graph H, you only need n to the power 3 by 2 queries. Okay. Like n to the power 3 by 2 polylog queries. And in the same paper, they were able to say that you at least need n to the power 3 by 2 queries, like adjacency queries, to make this graph H. Because proof says that, look, if I can construct this graph H, okay, then I can do list coloring here, and that will imply a coloring for G, right? But how to construct this edge? So in streaming, since you see all the edges, constructing this edge is obvious, okay? But in the query model where you don't even see all the edges once, you tell me as an oracle that, hey, is I comma j, adjacent? then I will tell you. And in fact, for this problem, they were able to show that it's a non-adaptive query. So you told me all the queries which you will ask me in the beginning itself. Not like, okay, I first ask a query, and now based on whatever information I have, I ask another query. So this is that they were able to show that this palette sparsification can be used to even give such kind of sublinear algorithms, which are like completely non-adaptive and very nice algorithms. Okay.